Hi, welcome to this part of my Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition core book review. This time we're going to talk about some of the disciplines in Vampire the Masquerade. First, an introduction to what disciplines are. Disciplines are those supernatural powers that make vampires stand out above humanity. They are partly why some vampires, or many vampires, consider humanity to be quite inferior. When Vampire the Masquerade first came out, that is the first edition of Vampire the Masquerade, some people said that Vampire the Masquerade was a superhero game with a dark theme because of the disciplines. When a vampire is just learning how to master the gifts of Cain, they may not seem too powerful or too outstanding. But later on, as the vampire gains power, he is capable of accomplishing things that will only appear in mythology and legend. In this core book, you do have some rules if you want to create elder vampires or become an elder vampire through diablerie. But I would recommend that you check out another book. I don't remember the name, but there is another book that deals more with elder vampires and such, if you want to play campaigns that are more on the high power side of things. So definitely check that out. I'm going to put the link in the description below to that particular book. First, let's talk about animalism. This discipline is about controlling animals and communicating with them. That is, manipulation of beasts and using those creatures as your own eyes and ears. This is the vampire exercising his control, his dominion over all the creatures. And they do not necessarily need to be stereotypical as you would see in myth and legend and folklore. Pretty much any animal can be subjected to the powers of animalism. First, when a vampire is just learning how to master this discipline, it could be just a very subtle communication with animals and calling them. And in a way, it also gives you control over your own inner beast. That is, a vampire in control of animalism can calm his own beast, but he can also draw out the beast of others. That is, this could be quite devastating in a situation where there's a need for diplomacy or subtlety. You could cause the beast to come out from a specific vampire, and chaos would surely ensue then. You could also possess animals. You could also read their spirits, what they have seen and experienced. And you could also exert your complete control over the beast to the point that you can enter frenzy at will. You could get into that state of increased anger and immunity to certain things, and this will be quite useful later on in battle. However, these more powerful or exaggerated effects can only be wielded by those that are elder vampires and quite experienced in animalism. You could even awaken the beast so much inside another vampire, an enemy, causing that target vampire to hurt himself, to almost like erupting in a fountain of blood and gore as the beast tries to claw its way out of that particular body. Then we have Auspex. Auspex is all about detecting auras, reading emotions and feelings, being able to perceive that which hides from normal sight. This is all about aura perception, making sense of the colors of the aura, trying to read the psychic impressions in a particular object. So Auspex is going to aid you quite a bit if you're sort of like a detective type of character. You also have telepathy and psychic projection, but also you could perceive events that happen at a great distance. You could also be able to make some predictions, that is, predicting or reading what someone is thinking or feeling, at least in a certain superficial level. Later on, with greater mastery, you will be able to perceive things that are more enshrouded, more difficult to take notice of, to the point that you can gain some pretty dark secrets about a particular subject or target, And you could even create a sort of like a psychic assault, attack the very mind of your target. And you could even develop extraordinary reflexes to the point that you are quite skilled in combat, be it ranged attack or melee. So that's really useful. You could even enter a sort of like a torpor state, while your body remains almost death-like. You could travel by psychic projection. And then we have celerity. This discipline works somewhat different when compared to other editions of Vampire the Masquerade, and I think for the better. Because each point of celerity adds 1 die to every dexterity related dice roll. And if you spend 1 blood point, you can take an extra action up to the number of dots that you have in celerity at the beginning of a particular turn. And you can even exceed the normal actions that you can take depending on your generation of vampire. And any dots that are used in this way, however, you cannot use them for dexterity related rolls. So this is great. There is a certain balance, but you still have that over the top capacity of acting faster than any other vampire. Elder vampires are even capable of transferring their own celerity or speed to anything that they launch. It could be a bullet or a knife, and you could also be quite devastating in hand-to-hand combat. So this is particularly useful for the Toreador, for example, that aren't exactly suited for combat all the time. You could become quite skilled in hand-to-hand or even when during firefights, and you can become so fast that you could even run up walls. So that's pretty amazing. Then we have chemistry. Now chemistry is all about causing illusions. This is typical of the Ravnos clan. All about deceiving the perceptions of others, making something appear before several witnesses. First, the manifestations will be quite subtle and temporary, but as you go up in your mastery of chemistry, things will become quite real. You could even cause the illusion to be so real that it will actually be capable of hurting someone. This is all about playing with the senses and even manipulating them however you like. That's quite scary. You could take the sight and the taste, for example, and the sense of touch of a person, and you could play around with those senses. You could even create some things that are almost completely real. Temporary as a particular object or a creature may be, a lot of things can be done during that duration or time where the illusion is active. Maybe you shouldn't call it illusion any longer. It could be a manifestation into physical reality. And then we have dementation. Dementation is a bit of a trademark of the Malkavian. It's all about going into the deeper, most insane recesses of the victim's mind and pulling out all of those monstrous thoughts, unresolved emotions, bringing out that passion and letting it explode. This is about awakening madness in some other people. This could have some disorienting effects, but it could also cause permanent madness, total insanity. You could even take your own insanity, and as many of you know, Malkavians are quite insane. You could take all of that madness and infect someone else with it. You could even create a sort of like a madness nuclear bomb. You could devastate entire cities using this discipline. You could make and break the minds of hundreds, if not more. That is, of course, talking about an elder vampire. You would need great mastery and power over the discipline. Some can feel that chemistry and dementation are a bit similar, but there is a significant difference. Chemistry feels a lot more controlled and flexible. You create things out of thin air, to put it in a way, and this could affect several witnesses, and you can specify what types of illusions you can create. But dementation, even though it is not so controlled, because you are not playing around with the senses of the target, you are going into that target's mind and bringing out the worst out of in terms of madness. It's a lot more powerful, more damaging, with longer effects, in my opinion, long-term effects. So it's more powerful but less focused. So for example, someone with chemistry can manipulate illusions for a particular objective, and the Malkavian just lets the madness flow and see what happens. And this is in a very general sense. You could play around with the different disciplines, but this is a way of understanding the differences between chemistry and emendation. And then we have dominate. This is a trademark of the Ventrue. Other vampires use it quite well, but the Ventrue are the ones who are pulling the strings all the time. So dominate is quite useful to make puppets out of those that are going against your own plans. It's a difficult discipline to enact. You need to be of a certain generation, that is, you cannot use it against more powerful vampires like someone of a lower generation than you. You may remember that lower than generation, the more powerful that the vampire is. And you also need eye contact, but this is in a somewhat loose sense. Some vampires, afraid of getting controlled by the Ventrue or other vampires that use dominate, they are even capable of gouging their own eyes out to prevent such control, or wearing mirrored sunglasses. But this is not so. This eye contact of sorts, rather it's the Ventrue trying to make a connection with the spirit of the victim. So first you could give very simple commands at the beginning, just something like run, jump, or laugh. This could serve as a distraction at its lowest level, but as you go up, you're going to take complete control of that person, erasing that person's memories, conditioning that person to follow different suggestions and patterns in any sort of situation. You could even take almost like complete possession of the victim. You could cause pain if your commands are not obeyed. You could even control small crowds through dominate. You could even enforce your command or your will over others that are far away from you, or you could even control them just by touching them and not having to look directly at them. The most terrifying effect is probably the complete control over those vampires that descend from you. Perhaps the entire masquerade is some sort of game that Cain is playing with the vampires. Maybe he has been controlling them through the use of dominate all this time. Very few mortals can resist when dominate is used upon them. And vampires in general will have a difficult time when trying to resist dominate. These disciplines that I have talked about, animalism, auspex, celerity, chemistry, emendation, and dominate, they are very useful to control other creatures, but they are also quite useful when perceiving that which is not easy to perceive at first glance. But you can also play around, of course, with the perceptions of others and even use their own madness against them. So these disciplines can be used quite effectively in different power plays and more subtle matters. Perhaps when you're trying to get some enemy in trouble and you don't want to be too open about attacking that enemy directly, even though in the case of the ementations, chemistry, and auspex, you do have a way, and even dominate, to cause terrible damage upon the victim while erasing all traces of evidence or not being blamed for it. So very lethal disciplines, not as direct as some of the others later on, but nonetheless, surely these disciplines will be quite developed in the portfolio or repertoire of a puppet master type of character. Well, thanks for watching this part of my Vampire the Masquerade multi-part review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.